So, a fighter. You fight. I fight. You probably know a couple people that fight. You know, you got your your MMA fighters, your boxers. You might be thinking of a knight, a bar fighter. There's a lot of different things that a fighter technically encompasses. Even a monk can be a fighter. A bard is kind of a fighter, a little bit. So, you might find this video a little confusing as to how I could determine the vibe of being a fighter in these two games, since a fighter is such a varied idea to the point where there really is no stereotypical idea of a fighter. But that's the point. That is the whole thing. Fighters have variety. Fighters can do pretty much anything. Fighters have so much style, so much interest, so many different ways of combat that it is really important to make sure that that is expressed in what you're doing that requires a fighter. If you're making a game and you got a fighter class and all he knows how to do is throw fisticuffs, well, then you didn't make a fighter class. You made like a boxer class. If you have a game and you have a fighter and the fighter is just basically a holy knight with a big ass longsword, well, you didn't make a fighter class, you made a knight. So you have to make sure that if you're going to put fighter into a game, it's got to have some variety. Let's see how these two games did it well. Or did it poorly. Alright, so Dark and Darker. Let's see how they did the fighter in their game. First thing we're going to take a look at is the stats. It's a pretty even spread. You got 15 strength, 15 vigor, 15 agility, slightly higher dex with 18, slightly higher will with 16, and then 15 knowledge, 15 resourcefulness. This is good. This is really good. It is a very baseline character that has room for improvement and room for going back down, depending on how you want to build your character out. Very well done. I like that. Actually, significantly a lot. So then let's take a look at, what they got on. Now, there's a lot of things that fighters can technically wear. They can wear plate mail. They can wear half mail. They can wear, standard clothing. But we're just going to go with the pretty standard Squire kit version, which just has a adventurer's tunic, cloth pants, some dashing boots, and leather gloves. Now, in terms of weaponry, I'm not going to say they have a specific one, because even in the Squire kit that you can get, there are a variety of different types of weapons that you can have. You might get a battle axe, which would make you a little bit more barbarian-esque. You might get an arming sword. You might get a short sword, a long sword, a mace. You can even use a dagger. So there is a lot of options in terms of your standard affair when it comes to fighter, which is good. Very useful that you have so many options. But I can't pin down what exactly a fighter gets. And that's a great thing. It's best to just say, what does a fighter get in terms of weaponry? It gets everything. A little bit of everything. I think the only thing it doesn't really get is most crossbows and magic. Speaking of more interesting skills like magic, let's go into the perks and skills for the fighter. So for fighter, you got about 12 perks and 9 skills. A pretty nice handful of perks and skills that can really give you a pretty good variety. In terms of perks, we have Adrenaline Spike, which whenever your health goes below 40%, you instantly become a faster attacker. Your attack speed goes up by about 15%. Then you have Barricade. Whenever you are blocking, your armor rating and magical resistance goes up by 50. Then you have Combo Attack, which just makes it so that any attack that you do within a 2-second period of a previous attack gets a 10% physical damage bonus. You have Counter Attack, which makes it so that whenever you block, your movement speed and action speed goes up by 10%, allowing you to attack back. Then you have Defensive Mastery, gaining an additional 10% armor rating. You have Dual Wielding, which allows you to gain 10% action speed if you have weapons on both hands. You have projectile resistance, which gives you an extra 10% projectile resistance. Obviously, I don't know why I felt the need to say it. That one was pretty self-explanatory. You get shield mastery, which gives you a movement bonus and an action speed bonus when you block, when you're blocking things. You get slayer, which gives you that whenever you're holding a weapon in each hand, you gain 5 weapon damage. You get swift, which means that you can move faster even with heavier armor on. Sword mastery, which allows you to use that whenever you're using a sword type weapon, you get extra damage and also additional movement speed. And weapon mastery, allowing you to use any weapon, even weapons that are not typically allowed for fighters. So this includes things like spears, bow and arrows, and crossbows. There are a few other things that I can't think of right off the top of my head. But yeah, anything that wouldn't normally be able to use by a fighter, you can now use. I think this is a great spread. You have things for fighters that are all about getting in and dealing as much damage as quickly as possible. Things for more defensive high PDR fighters that are just about being able to tank as much as possible. Ones that are a lot more skilled fighters where they're blocking and attacking. Then you can also get things like ones that go buck wild and say fuck it to defense, like dual wielding master, which allows you just keep throwing on attacks as hard as possible. I think it's super well done. Let's take a look at the skills now. Alright, so next up we have are the skills. You have Adrenaline Rush, which gives you a 15% boost to your action speed for 8 seconds, but then once it's over, you lose 8% of your action speed and movement speed for 2 seconds. Then you have Breakthrough, which will remove all slow debuffs for 10 seconds, and then you also get Perfect Block, which gives you better block resistance for attacks. Second Wind, which will heal you for 40% of your maximum HP over the course of 12 seconds. Shield Slam, 25 damage, and also slows down your the opponent's move speed by 20%. Spell Reflection, whenever you're blocking for 3 seconds, any spell attacks will bounce off of you. Then you have Sprint, just allows you to move faster for 2 seconds. Taunt, which will make all enemies within an area come toward you. And Victory Strike, which gives you an extra 20% to physical damage for your next attack. And if it kills that enemy, you gain 15% damage, 15% health back. These are all really good and are also kind of situational. Except for Second Wind. Second Wind is just universally good, and if you don't have Second Wind on your character, you're kind of just being an idiot. Second Wind is just too good to not have. And in terms of everything else, they are situational, but still can be extremely useful. Being able to turn off all slow debuffs that you might have could be really fudging useful. Being able to reflect spell damage. If you have a wizard shooting, what is it called? Magic missile at you, that's great for reflecting it back at them. Sprint will let you move around the battlefield quicker or run up to an opponent when they're least expecting it. Taunt can make it a more dangerous situation to fight because you're bringing all the monsters to you. And so now if enemies want to fight you, you're stuck in a risk-reward type of situation. Then you have Victory Strike, which allows you to, which is just great for if you know you're going to be doing a lot of PvP, then whenever you kill something, you gain a little bit more health and the ability to go attack somebody else now. It is just generally a pretty good spread. In terms of like thoroughness of how much I would consider you like a really varied fighter, you do have some variants, don't get me wrong. You do have a lot of different types of playstyles with this. But it is more geared toward people that are just like high defense, high damage. That's like the main type of fighter. It kind of expects you to be using some more really strong weapons. So it's not bad, but it's not the best. Let's take a look at D&D and see if they do things a little bit better. Alright. So before I throw myself headfirst into the Dungeons and Dragons version of the fighter, I just need to say that this is a lot. This is a lot. You have different fighting styles, you have your subclasses. Some of those subclasses have maneuvers, and there's like 35 of them. There is a lot of stuff going on here. There's even a subclass that gives you just straight up spells. So I need you to understand that I'm not going over every aspect of the fighter here because I do not have the time or patience to do such a thing. I'm going to go over the gist. I'm only covering 2 subclasses, which I have done for every single class that I've covered so far. We're only going over 2. And even in those 2, I'm not going over every single maneuver because there's a lot of them. So let's jump in. Also, the same preface as always, I'm not going to talk about base gear because although the book does technically have a section about starting equipment, not every class has very much information written down there. Some of them do, some of them don't. And I just would rather say, listen, it's an RPG game where you don't have to listen to this at all. It's basically just if the DM wants to or not. So we're just not going to worry about that section. And we're instead going to just go into what the fighter can actually do. Essentially the perks and skills where we to be talking about Dark and Darker. First off, we have the fighting styles. First couple fighting styles we have here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, and they are all pretty good. I mean, one of them's bad, but most of them are pretty good. We have archery, a +2 bonus to rolls made with ranged weapons, pretty good. Maybe you're a ranged fighter. You have defense, which gives you a +1 to your AC, great. Always good to be a tankier boy. Then you have your dueling, which just makes it so that if you are holding a one-handed weapon, you get a +2 to your damage rolls. That's pretty strong, if I'm not even gonna lie. You have great weapon fighter. If you have a two-handed weapon, then when you roll for damage, if it is a 1 or a 2, you get to re-roll it and take whatever the second option is. You have protection, which is the one that I told you that is bad, where if you have a shield and are within a 5-foot radius of an enemy who is attacking an ally, you can impose disadvantage onto their attack roll. That is so specific, so situation specific, that that's rarely ever going to come up. So that's pretty bad. Then you have two weapon fighting, which basically just means that if you are dual wielding, you can add your modifier to your second attack as well. All those fighting styles are super great. They really paint a picture of different types of fighters you might be going with. Maybe you've got a big ass bow. Maybe you're a knight who wields a shield or has plate mail on. You know, maybe you're someone that has one shield in one hand and a sword in another. Maybe you have a giant bastard sword. You know, there are a lot of different ideas of what you might be running for here. My only thing that they have that I'm a little disappointed they don't have here is like a melee fighter. They don't have one that has no weapons at all, that's just using bare hands. But I understand that that's pretty hard to implement, especially when literally every class could just pop out with bare hands. So next up we have are the skills that are not a part of your subclass. These are things like you have Second Wind, which just allows you to, as a bonus action, regain a bit of health in the middle of an attack. You can use Action Surge, which just makes it so that for one turn you can attack twice instead of once. Then you have your Extra Attack, which just allows you to attack a second time, period, just at all times. And then you have Indomitable, which allows you to re-roll any failed saving throw. All of those are pretty good. They apply to every single fighter. You can use any of those for anything. Flavor that however you want. I think that they're all just good abilities that I would expect from a fighter, because fighters are just like that, and I think fighters are cool. Now, we're getting into the more complicated stuff. We are going to be going over the champion fighter and the Battlemaster fighter. I know some of you are going to be like, oh, I know the BHB. I know that it has the freaking Eldritch Knight fighter. I don't want to go through spells. I don't want to. Also, I think the idea of maneuvers sound cool as hell, and although I haven't read what the maneuvers are just yet, I'm hoping they're going to be cool. So, we're instead just going to start with just the champion and the Battlemaster. Alright, so for champion, you get improved critical. This is an amazing starting feature. Like, this is just as soon as you get this subclass, boom, it's there. You got this. And that is making it so criticals are no longer just nat 20s, they're also natural 19s. That's pretty insane. That's great. Then you get a Remarkable Athlete, which allows you to add your proficiency modifier to any strength, dexterity, or constitution check that doesn't already use your proficiency bonus. You can get additional fighting styles. So those fighting styles I mentioned earlier, you can now pick a second one. You get Superior Critical, which is just an upgrade from that first level ability, now making it so an 18 is the minimum you need to consider your attack a critical attack. Then you can also get Survival, which makes it so every time you start a fight, you get a +5 to your Constitution modifier, and if you are dead, this does not apply. Also, if you are over half health, this does not apply. Pretty good. The champion one is all about being someone who honed their craft over years and years. It is about being extremely skillful to be as deadly as possible. So I like the idea of, because of how good you are and how skillful you are, you're able to notice the critical points that you're able to attack somebody. So it's like you've been fighting for so long that you can literally tell and see someone's opening as soon as it's there, making it more likely that you're going to land a deadlier hit on someone. I think that's super interesting. And then with the Remarkable Athlete, you're trained, you're toned, you're fucking great. So yeah, you're going to be really good at jumping over tables or fudging, I don't know, breaking down a door, or whatever you need to do. That makes sense. I think that is actually really well done, and the fact that you get an extra fighting style, once again, makes sense. You've been training for this. You've been training your whole life, and if you're just a Drac of one trait, you're kind of not making good use of yourself. You can be way more useful if you have at least 2 things that you're really good at. Next up we have is the Battle Master. Alright, so right at the onset of getting Battle Master, you get to choose 3 maneuvers. But like I said, there's like 20 of them. So I'm just going to read them all. Not the entire description, just the names. And I'm going to put the descriptions here or there so that you can see it. And you can either read it yourself or just do what I'm doing, which is saying the names of them and then kind of imagining what they might be in my own head. So your options, you get 3 of these, are Commander Strike, Disarming Attack, Distracting Strike, Evasive Footwork, Feinting Attack, Goading Attack, Lunging Attack, Maneuvering Attack, Menacing Attack, Parry, Precision Attack, Pushing Attack, Rally, Riposte, Sweeping Attack, and Trip Attack. Now, obviously, some of these sound pretty good, and some of these are obvious. Other ones feel like you might actually need to read the descriptions. So Disarming Attack, obviously, you get a chance to disarm somebody. Distracting Attack, possibly, I'm assuming it is an attack you can use that will take aggro off of other characters. Evasive Footwork, maybe it raises your AC temporarily. Feinting Attack allows you to spook them and maybe make them flinch, and now they lose their action for a turn. You can get Goading Attack, maybe making it so that the enemy is now required to attack you on their next turn. Parry, obviously self-explanatory. Precision Attack, maybe it makes it more likely that you're going to hit a critical. You can get your Riposte, sounds like a parry to me. Those are the same thing in my eyes. You can get Sweeping Attacks. Maybe this is like an AoE type of attack where you can hit multiple creatures within a certain range. And Trip Attack, which can potentially knock somebody prone. And then there's a few other ones that I'm not going to go over, mostly because of the fact that I don't necessarily know what they mean just based on their names, and I'm not going to read them. So now let's go over the rest of what Battle Master gives you. So the only other thing of significance for this video that you receive using Battle Master is getting Know Your Enemy, which just allows you to, through a 1-minute conversation with somebody, you can gauge their ability to fight you or to fight back. You can essentially tell if they are at your level, above you, or worse than you in terms of fighting capability. It's a pretty cool ability. I think it works out well, and I just find it interesting that when I read Champion and Battle Master, my first thought was like, oh, these descriptions of what they represent are kind of similar, But then actually reading them and seeing the abilities that they have, you can kind of tell that it's like champion fighter is more so like a trained knight. You get a little bit of a lot of different things to help you just be extremely deadly in combat in more of a show-offy way. While instead with Battlemaster, it's more like you are somebody who's been learning a discipline. You are someone that has been learning, let's say, Kung Fu or something like that, where you are learning all of the nitty-gritties of your specific way of fighting people. And I think that's very interesting that despite the fact they're very similar, they can also be very different at the same time. So in terms of Dungeons and Dragons or Dark and Darker, which one I think did Fighter better? Purely because of the fact that of how it's built, I think that Dungeons and Dragons did it way better than Dark and Darker did. I love Dark and Darker. I think they did a great fighter, but they kind of made the game in such a way that if you're not running PDR fighter, you might as well not be running fighter at all. They did not make the variability because they did not add subclasses to the game. And without subclasses, you kind of pigeonhole the fighter into like 2 or 3 categories of what it really means to be a fighter in that regard. But thank you all for watching the video. I hope you guys agree with me, and I hope to see y'all in the next one. Good night.